All right, kids, welcome to another video. This video, I'm going to go through how to program in Python, especially for Windows. A lot of you are starting to bring in your own laptops. Therefore, I just wanted to make a little video on how you should have some sort of a Python coding environment set up. Now, this is not the only way to do so, but this is probably going to be good enough and going to give you a really good foundation for you to program in Python for throughout the semester. For those of you who are using a Mac or using the school computers or using a Chromebook, there will be future videos being posted for you as well, so stay tuned for that. But let's get this video started. What I recommend first is following this guide that I'm going to post on your Google Classroom. And it's going to really go through just what you're going to need to install. It's going to be very basic. I'm actually going to set some rule for you that it's going to make your early life easier. And as you get more comfortable with using the IDE of our choice, which is called Visual Studio Code, you will be able to do more things with it. But we're going to keep it bare bones as possible so that, we can just really just strictly focus on coding in Python. So what you're going to do first, this was my preferred method to just get Python onto your computer and just have things work with VS Code as well. So first and foremost, you're going to install Python onto your machine. And you're going to install any Python 3 version from Microsoft Store. I do recommend the latest is better, but anywhere, if you install either 3.9, 3.10, or 3.11, you should be more than good for this assignment. Okay, and I've given you all the links in this document for all the things you might have to install on this document. So if you go to this link, it should go and take you to a Microsoft Store page, and you can just get it here, or you can actually literally open up the Microsoft Store app on your Windows and just search for Python 3.11. Make sure that it's provided by the Python organization. Follow through with the installer. You're most likely going to be clicking yes to everything and let that be installed. Now, if you're a little cautious and if you're a little paranoid about everything going on, after installation, I just recommend that you restart your computer. Just install all these apps one by one and just restart your computer so that it's going to start off fresh. So once you know that Python 3 has been installed, what you're going to do is install Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is a coding environment developed by Microsoft, and it's actually really, really powerful. Okay, and it's something we would call an IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment. So, when you do use this document to help you get Python on your computer, I do recommend that you have a read through of these two little paragraphs. Okay, and if you install Visual Studio Code and have just finished this step 1 and step 2, you are now more than ready to start programming in Python. But what I'm going to do ask you also is to install Git. Um, Git is a version control system, and we're going to be actually using Git and GitHub throughout the semester to really manage every coding project and exercises that you do, and so that you will have a public portfolio of your Python coding skills. And I'm just going to teach you this really, really beneficial real world skill so that you can start using Git in your post secondary career and your actual legitimate career in the future when you do programming for some awesome company. Okay, now here's some rules to start off. I really don't want you to install any extensions for VS Code, except for maybe a Markdown previewer, which you can follow this link to install onto your VS Code. Other than that, really, they just kind of get in the way, and you might see all these pop-ups and messages coming out when you're starting to program in Python, but I don't want those popping up to confuse you. And later on, when you're really comfortable with all that, you can install your own. And please, please, please practice good file management. We have already learned and analyzed a lot of articles about that. So I do want you to be very clean and tidy with your code. Okay. So I'm hoping by this point that you have installed Python 3, Visual Studio Code, and you have installed Git. And what I'm going to do is now just write a simple Python program in Visual Studio Code to show you how that looks like. Okay, kids, so I've opened up Visual Studio Code. What I'm going to do is you're probably at this welcome page or you might be going through some tutorial, but at any point you can go File and just create a new window, and you can always open up and start a new session of Visual Studio Code as long as you close the other one that's been open, just for your RAM sake. And what I like to do is really just say open folder, because what I want to do is code in a folder of my choice. And what I like to do is on my computer and on your computer as well, I recommend that you go to your local disk, go to your users, and you should have some sort of a user, um, Windows user that is using the computer, right? So mine is called Jasper after my first name, and this is considered my home directory for this user. And in the home directory, I have a folder called code, and I'm going to be doing my code here. So since we're beginning to code for Python, I'm just going to create a new folder and let's call it 01 basics, where we're going to be doing some basic level programming as unit 1. So that's going to be my naming structure, where I'm going to put the unit number first and maybe a little word to describe what this unit's all about. And I'm going to just create that folder and get into it. And I'm going to select this folder. Now I've created or I've opened Visual Studio Code, where I'm going to be now starting to create some Python files for our basic unit. So in my Explorer, what I'm going to do is create and click this button called, it's going to create a new file. And I'm going to say this is going to be my first underscore program.py. And it's going to always, it might say that, I'm going to recommend that you install the Python extension. This is a really more of a helper. It doesn't install Python onto your VS Code, but it just is installing some extensions to make your life easier when writing in Python. I'm going to ignore that from now on. Okay. So right now, I have my first program. Python program made. We know that it's a Python program because we have .py, and we're gonna, write some basic code. So we're gonna start off with writing a comment. Comment is a way to leave readable notes for other programmers or for your future self, so that when you revisit this code, you know what this code is all about. I personally like to start off with 4 little things. The title of our program, we're gonna call this an adder program. And we're going to write the date, which is whatever date you want it to be, where it's going to be 0929. 0909 2023. And we're going to write the author, which is Mr. Park. And the purpose of our program is to write a simple adding program. And we just like to have those 4 lines of comments at the very top. I'm definitely going to be asking for this for all your coding assignments, but it's just a really nice way just to organize and start your program. Have a title, write a date when, you can have like last edited date. So if you're working on a very long programming project, you might want to leaves that kind of date. Although we're going to be using Git and GitHub throughout the semester, so that could also help you do version control and leave notes like so, right? If you're working with multiple authors, or if you're going to be an author, or if you're ever going to publish your code, right? It's always nice to have that documented and just have a really very simple single line purpose stating what the program is supposed to do. And as I go on, I do like to write more comments to help me out. So we're going to create an adder program, and the purpose is to, simple adding. So we need 2 numbers. So we're going to write we're going to need some input. So I'm going to create a variable. Num1 is equal to input, enter a number, like that. So in Python, you don't have to state the data type of a variable. You can just create the label for the variable, and as long as you create an assignment operation assigned to certain value, you have now created a variable. And the variable is going to be dynamic. It's going to take on whatever data type of the value is going to be, and it's going to accept that. right? It doesn't matter if you gave it an integer, floating point, boolean, string, list, dictionary, sets. It doesn't matter what the data type of the value was, as long as you have an equal sign stating that this label is a variable that holds this value, then Python's going to be happy. And also in Python, we don't need a semicolon to indicate that we have finished writing this line. Right now, we have completed this line. We're saying num1 is going to be the result of an input function. Well, what does an input function do? Input function is a way for us to grab user, like me, who's going to be using this program when it's running, and we're going to be inputting some values through the keyboard, okay? So let's actually see how this goes, and I'm going to open up a terminal. So we're going to say new terminal, and my terminal's down here. This is our command console, and we have done some reading on this in the past. Okay, and if you notice, right now, my PowerShell, which is the terminal for Windows, is located or pointing towards the C drive users Jasper code and inside the folder called 01 Basics. Okay, so if I were to say ls, I can list everything that is inside my directory of 01 Basics, and it has my first program. I'm just going to clear that. And for our sanity's sake, I'm going to move this to the right. Okay, so I'm just going to drag that over. And what I want to do is say, well, let's just check if Python is working. We've installed the Python. Let's just see if our VS Code can talk to Python through terminal. Depending on how the installation went, you might be able to just write Python, or you might have to write Python 3. But in my machine, I was able to just type Python, and I was able to get the single line interpreter running. So in my machine, I'm running Python 3.9.5. And inside this interpreter, I can execute normal Python code as it is. So I can say hello class. And if I press enter, it will output the string message of hello, class. Now this, with this interpreter, we can only write single line instructions over and over and over again, so it's not really useful. So this is why we create Python programs, so that the interpreter can actually read these lines one by one to execute our Python code. Here, I'm just going to write and run the exit function so that we can actually exit the Python interpreter. And once again, I'm going to now run the clear, I'll say function for our terminal so that I can, just have a nice little fresh page. So if you are in the folder you're working on with a Python file, from that folder, if you have terminal running, you can say Python and give it the name of the file along with .py to actually execute that Python file through the Python interpreter. So I'm going to say first program.py after writing the word Python. And if I press enter, it's going to output that message. Enter a number. We call this a prompt. An input function takes a single argument, a single thing inside the bracket, and it has to be a string, a textual data, and it's going to actually output that into the console when this program is running. It's a really nice way for us to leave an instruction of what is happening on our Python program, because right now our Python program is frozen. It cannot do anything. It can't move on to the next line of code because the input function needs to be finished, and it is waiting for us to input text data from our keyboard on the console. So if I write 10, now it's over. The new line of my terminal was displayed out. My program's done. This Python program only has 7 lines, and freaking 6 of them were just comments or empty spaces. But in this program so far, we were able to assign the variable num1 with the value of a 10. So num1 is 10. Okay. Now, little note about the input function is the following. The input function always returns its data as a string. And actually, let's just put that in the bottom so that we can read it fully. All right, so when we run the input function, no matter what type of data that you wrote on your console, the input function is going to be like, whatever, I don't care what you wrote, I'm just going to trap it as a string. And we don't really want to add strings in this program. We want to add integers or numbers or floats. In this case, just for simplicity's sake, we are going to be adding integers. Okay, so what we want to do is say, well, num1, I'm going to update you to an integer of yourself. This is what we're doing is we have updated num1 to be an integer rather than a string. Okay, so now let's see what happens. Nothing really is going to happen, but I would just want to show you that it's still going to run perfectly fine, but I want to show you some errors that might occur during execution. So I'm entering a number. If I enter 10, there's going to be no issues. 10 is a perfectly valid string that can be converted into an integer. But if we were to run that same code again, by the way, I was able to just copy that by clicking the up arrow because console remembers the previous instruction. So we're going to go Python first underscore program.py, execute that code, and let's just try hello. Okay. I did not save my program. That's my issue there. We're going to try running that again. We're going to try hello, and we get this error message. It says traceback. Our first underscore program.py had an error on line 10, which is right here, right? Line 10. It says num is equal to int num1. We have updated, and it even prints us the comment. It says value error. Invalid literal for int with base 10, and it was having trouble converting hello into an integer because Python's like, yo, I don't know what hello is in number, so I gave you an error. I can't continue on with this code. Okay, so don't get scared when you get messages like this. It is trying to tell you that something went wrong, and it is our job as programmers to fix that because Python, the interpreter, is not the smartest thing in the world. Okay, it doesn't understand spelling mistakes. It doesn't understand that we were trying to do something and we were just hoping that Python would understand. We have to write instructions clearly as possible. Okay, and we will learn how to mitigate these kind of issues later on when we do error checking and handling exceptions. But for right now, we're just going to pray to God that whoever uses this program is going to be inputting proper numbers as input. Now, in this code, we have spent 2 lines of code to grab an input and turn it into an integer. For our next number, I'm going to show you how to do that a little simpler. So we're going to grab num2 is equal to the integer. We're going to be doing some functions within a function, and we're going to write input in the inside as well. And say enter another number. What's going to happen here is that for variable 2, it is going to hold the result of the int function. But the int function cannot be executed until the inner function is completed, which ended up being an input function. So we're going to grab a string data from the user when we run this code from the console. Once that is grabbed, the int function is going to be able to convert that into an integer and let the variable called num2 hold that value. Okay, and then we're going to be doing some processing. Okay, and we can do some output as well in the future, and we can do some print statements just to show you some outputs for this program. So we can say num1 is comma num1 and num2 is, we're going to do plus num2. Okay, here, I want that like that. Now, I have 2 different ways of using print statement here, and print statement, what it does, it outputs any data that it can output to the console when we're running it as a Python program. Now, we can separate items in our print function, or what we call arguments, right? Functions use arguments as inputs for its function. So that's the terminology that we use as Python developers. So our print function is going to take this as an argument. And since we have a comma, we actually have another argument. So right now, our line 16's print function has two arguments. Okay. It is taking the string called num is colon and has another argument of the variable num1. Whereas on line 17, what we're actually doing is the following. We're actually doing a operation, then running print function on it. The plus operator exists for both numeric data and also can be used for strings. We call the plus operator a concatenation operator for strings. Concatenation is the ability to join two strings side by side. All right. So a lot of Python YouTube guru teachers like to use this one and this one interchangeably, and they kind of don't explain what's happening in detail. The print function is a very special function that it can take pretty much infinite number of arguments. And if you have a lot of data, you can just say, I'm going to output data 1, comma data 2, comma data 3, all in one line, and it will be separated by spaces. However, certain YouTubers in the Python education space will just use a plus sign willy-nilly, never explain what it is, or just kind of brush it off. But what they're actually doing is called string concatenation. They're joining a string with another string. But the issue is going to be, and we're going to see an error here, num2 is an integer. I can't add an integers to a string. It just doesn't make sense because, like, what is num2 is colon plus a number. Like, we can't generate a new number, nor can we generate a string. Because Python, when you are using these operators, they want the data type of the left value and the data type of the right value of the operator to be the same. Therefore, we're going to need to do something. But I just want to show you what happens when we run into this error. So first and foremost, you're going to save your program and we're going to run this code. I'm going to enter a number 10. I'm going to enter another number of 20. Notice how for the line 16, num is colon num1, it automatically adds a space because it is now separating this data outputted with this num1 data, and it automatically adds a space. But when it tried to execute line 17, Python ran into an error. It says the plus operator, a concatenation operator for strings, can only concatenate strings, not int, to a string. It is freaking out. It can't add an integer to a string. So in line number 9, we have done something called typecasting. We have turned a string into an integer. So in Python, we would hope that we should be able to do the reverse. We want to now turn our integer into a string. If you wanted to do that, we can say string of num2, as in we're going to convert that integer num2 variable into a string, and then we're going to add it on to our previous string, which is num2 is colon. Now, this is going to be a little ugly, and you're going to see why. We're going to go run our program. We're going to do 10, 20. And notice how we don't have that nice space added for us because it had literally added this string version of 20 right beside num2 is colon. Therefore, if you wanted to do something like this, I do suggest that you just put space there, or you can just put another plus symbol and write a space like so. So this topic's called string formatting and making your string look nice, and we will have a whole nother lesson on that way later on. Okay. Now let's get to the final finale of this program. We want to add these two numbers, and whenever we have new data, it is always a nice idea to have a variable. So we could say we have a variable called answer. Once again, we don't need to specify the data type, nor have a semicolon at the end. And then we're going to say num1 plus num2, as in the variable called answer is going to be assigned a value. And that value is going to be the result of a plus operation running on this integer num1 and integer num2. So we can now write another print statement as our final output saying, hey, the answer is, and I'm just going to write a comma and output the variable answer. And the nice thing about this is that when you just use colon, the print is going to automatically convert any data that you provide, any argument that you provide separated by commas as a string. So it's going to auto typecast that for us, and we don't need to convert it into a string. Save that program. I'm going to clear my console and run our program. Python first program.py. Boom. We're going to give it 10, 20. We have outputted that num1 is 10, num2 is 20, and the answer ended up being 30. Okay. That was your very first program in Python. We have learned how to install and what to install in our system, especially for our Windows, and we have wrote a very basic program. But within this lesson, we've actually learned how to create a variable, how to use the input function, how to convert a string to an integer, and how to convert an integer to a string, and put that all inside a print statement so that we can get a nice output. Thank you for watching, and stay classy.